The earth we live in is filled with natural beauty, in both non-living and living things, from thousands of years ago to now. The land we live in provides us the resources and necessary components we need in our everyday life, such as food, water, and oxygen. While this miracle of life naturally occurs in diverse ecosystems across the world, it can be disrupted by the introduction of the invasive species. Invasive species are also known as introduced species, alien species, or exotic species, are organisms that are not indigenous or native to a particular area. Invasive species can be any sort of non-native plant or animal that can cause harm to the environment they are introduced in. However, not all non-native species are classified as invasive. For a species to be considered invasive, they must grow and adapt to their new area quickly. Invasive species can originate from anywhere, even from a similar area or the same country. To better understand what invasive species are, the root causes, and how they affect the earth and its ecosystems, we must first know where they came from.
There are many ways on how invasive species could be introduced. In some instances, they were introduced to an area in an attempt to control the population of other species. However, some attempts were unsuccessful to the point that the invasive species could no longer be controlled. In some cases, invasive species could be introduced completely by accident. The effects of an invasive species are unpredictable, as they can be beneficial or harmful to the existing species within the ecosystem. So, it is important to educate people and raise awareness about possibly transporting wildlife to a new area or habitat, along with its implications and consequences, such as leading to future invasions and the loss of different habitats. Invasive species can cause the destruction or displacement of native species. They can be predatory or become competition in the hunt for resources. Their introduction to an ecosystem can disrupt the flow of energy, which may lead to a loss in biodiversity.
The Philippines is known to be rich in biodiversity, with over 7,107 islands and 6.5 hectares of forest. It is one of the 17 mega-biodiverse countries in the entire world. However, due to the increase in global trade, rising populations, and economic activities, there have been multiple cases of invasive species being introduced in its ecosystem. One example of invasive species in the Philippines is the Melina arborea, or locally known as yamane. It has become prominent because of its many uses, such as a raw material for paper making and pulp, as fuel wood and plywood. Despite its many uses, it was discovered that the broad leaves of the yamane extract pests such as Ozola minor, Atticus, and Psilodes. Another example is the Cromolena odorata, a type of weed that has been reported to be poisonous to livestock and prevents other forage species from growing. Moreover, the weed can be a fire hazard during the dry season. Another example is the Lantana camara, which was introduced because of its colorful flowers. But the plant is considered undesirable because it can be poisonous to livestock when eaten. Research is still being done on how invasive species in the Philippines could affect its immediate surroundings. Due to the fact that the research has not quite reached a conclusion, it may seem like there is very little impact on the environment. However, in other parts of the world, invasive species have had major impacts on their environment.
In the US, feral pigs are considered one of the most destructive invasive species. Since they are omnivores, they can thrive on almost anything and survive in adverse conditions. Moreover, these feral pigs do not have a natural predator, which allows their growth to continue unchecked. They wreak havoc on suburban areas and parks, and prey on other wildlife. They are potential carriers of diseases such as swine brucellosis and pseudorabies, diseases which can affect domestic pigs and become a problem for the pork industry. This is an example of how invasive species can have an economic, social, and environmental impact. Invasive species are able to cause the extinction of native plants and animals because they have no predator. They are able to compete with native species in terms of habitats. In other areas, the presence of invasive species can destroy the environment and turn into a disaster. An example of an invasive species that destroys habitats is the hemlock woolly, an insect originally from Asia. The hemlock woolly has killed an estimated 80% of hemlock trees in the eastern United States. This shows how invasive species threaten to deplete natural resources. Because of this, those invasive species also pose a threat to humans, as humans depend on various natural resources and will face challenges if they are exhausted. Other invasive species do not destroy habitats, but prey on endemic species. An example would be Burmese pythons, which have killed many local mammal and bird populations. Burmese pythons kill any animals they encounter. They are also capable of preying on alligators and have killed endangered birds. If Burmese pythons are not stopped, birds that are endangered may become extinct. If left uncontrolled, invasive species can alter the structure of the food web in an ecosystem. They can destroy the food source or become predators of native species, which will then affect all the other species in that area that depend on each other for food. This may cause further depletion of other food sources or possibly the extinction of those species.
Invasive species can have various harmful effects on the areas they invade, which can also cause damage in communities throughout the country and lower the overall species diversity. Invasive species cause large losses of crops, disrupt normal patterns of animal life by killing large numbers of endemic species, and deplete natural resources that people rely on, such as food, medicines, and oil. As invasive species spread aggressively and reproduce quickly, they can become a major threat to living creatures in that ecosystem. A very important fact to note is that many invasive species are placed into a foreign habitat due to the movements of humans. Without humans moving so freely across the globe, most species would have stayed in their natural habitats and would remain a regular part of their ecosystem. As our species has played a major part in introducing these invasive species, we should take action to remove them from their new habitats and return them where they are naturally found.